So the rushing thing is interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because I said Jess asked me, Cootie asked me the other day. Somebody had some questions on Husker Sports Nightly about needing a 1,000 yard rusher,
Hmm.
and remember my response was, man, if they could go for about 1750, that'd be nice.
Yeah. So that's only about 50 yards more than they had last year.
But now that I think about it, they need to be better than 3.8 as a team.
Yes.
And the 22 rushing touchdowns is low.
Yeah. So you probably need that number to be mid 30s.
Yes, I would think.
Yeah. I like to feel pretty good. So they're 3-9 as a team. Obviously, some of that is, although not a ton, is negative yardage there. You've only
No, the
got,
average is the average. I mean, it
yeah,
counts.
right. No, I
Yeah.
know. But I'm talking about like quarterback
Quarterbacks?
negative
Yeah.
yardage. Like Dylan's only got negative 65 yards total.
Yeah.
So off of that total, we're not talking about a crazy number
Mhm.
there. It's not like, some of these guys take a couple hundred yards of negative. Like that wasn't the case. So I just wanted to kind of dispel that part of it. But, I asked you off air, or I asked you as we were going to break there, if you would take 5-1, 4-8, 4-3 as your top three rusher yards per carry. And you unequivocally, very quickly said no.
No.
I think off the cuff, a lot of people out of context would say
I
yes.
think you got to be, unless you're exclusively a short yardage guy, which they
So
don't have.
Dowdell not
Yeah,
exclusively,
but
but
he was your starter
he
for
was.
so
But a
not
lot of those carries ended up being short yardage stuff. I mean, that's why he ends up with the 12 touchdowns, right?
but I
But I get your point.
I mean you got to be as a good you have to be 5'5" or better.
Yeah. And that would put you nationally, if you get at least 100 carries, about top 50 last year, at least.
5'5".
That puts you in the neighborhood.
Because I think, the one thing that you want to see increase, and I asked Shafe about total yards versus yards per carry. I should have brought in touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I, you need rushing touchdowns, right? Kyle asked a good question, right? He says, were the red zone issues more line or running backs? Listen, it's a great question.
It's tough.
It's a great
It's
question.
tough.
M- m- Anecdotally,
Mm-hmm.
because I know how I felt real time, but I'm also in the booth.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it was a running back issue,
Okay.
especially early.
Yeah.
Missed a lot of holes, but I'd have to go kind of game by game. But anecdotally, shorthand, I think it was more RBs. And I think Coach Holgerson kind of said the same when he got here too, right? Like, that makes some of these guys miss a little bit, or kind of missed a hole, or we got in and out, or we got busy. So I think the continuity of doing the same kinds of plays over and over again will let you know, hey, Mike's going to play over the top. Hey, front side safety, that's the guy I'm accountable for as the back. It won't be as much guesswork,
Mm-hmm.
right? You'll just know. Hey, free defender's probably going to be the boundary corner here. Got to
Yeah.
make that guy miss, or whatever. Like,
Right.
the more you do it, the more the more you'll know.
Yeah. I'm trying to see where 35 rushing touchdowns would get us in terms of nationally, because I like to see sort of contextually, when we're throwing out.
You need low 30s.
Yeah. Like,
It's out there. I looked at it once last year when I figured out that Michigan had 40 some odd rushing touchdowns and only had like 15 yards per carry, or 15 yards a game more than Nebraska,
yeah,
but 20 some odd more
more
rushing touchdowns.
touchdowns.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, because I do like to kind of put in context when we're throwing these numbers out there, what exactly we're talking about in terms of what's realistic, right? For achievability. That's where I go, hey, being a top 50 running back at 5.5 yards a carry isn't a huge ask,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's a reasonable thing to ask from a running back, is to be top 50 in the country if you're Nebraska and you're kind of focused on running the football. Being at 5-1, which is what EJ was at last year, puts you around 100. Probably need to be better than that. Like that's
So
probably need to be better than that.
for teams that, like, let's say, what was Nebraska rushing a game? 140?
It's right at 130, I believe.
So in that ballpark, and I've got to go way to. Do you want touchdowns or yards per game?
I want touchdowns first. I want to see.
Okay, so Jacksonville State led the country in rushing touchdowns. Army was second. Notre Dame was third. Do you know how many rushing, or what Notre Dame rushed for as a team? As a team,
Touchdowns.
rushed for as a team per rush.
Oh, 5-2.
5-6. Army was 5-5. Boise was 6 per. Bama, who had 41 rushing touchdowns,
Mm-hmm.
was only 4-6 per carry. So when you look at like rushing yards per game, and you want to go to, um, like I, if I had it to do, if like in a perfect world, it would be about touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think I would go yards per carry. Then I think I would go total yards. Does that sound right?
I think touchdowns, I agree with touchdowns for sure because I do think that's a big issue with the red zone scoring is if you're getting consistent rushing touchdowns, then I'm going to assume your red zone scoring has been fixed mostly.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll take that for sure. I kind of waffle back and forth between yards per carry and total yardage because I do think total yardage can be a little overrated because I don't want to run it 40 times for 120 yards, right? That's not really useful to anybody. But I do think there
Unless you're
is,
going to factor in time of possession.
well, right. So I do think there is a benefit to being committed to showing that part of your offense as well. And so that can mess with yards per carry a little bit. You know, we've seen some pretty gaudy yards per carry numbers on offenses that weren't particularly good rushing offenses just because occasionally you pop one and it sort of goes that way. So I waffle a little bit on those. If you really put my feet to the fire, I'd probably say yards per carry.
Are we more apt to overlook rushing because of the quarterback, or do we still want to run the football?
We
Like in your sphere of influence.
I think we are more like if Dylan is balling, then we will overlook rushing
Yeah.
quite a bit more. Part of the reason it became such a talking point last year was because we felt like, hey, if in order for Dylan to be better, we need more out of the rushing game.
Although I will say this, Nebraska's amount of touchdowns for as fewer yards as they ran for a game is incredible.
Mm.
Let me give you some other teams between 128 and 145.
Okay.
Okay, pretty. So Kentucky ran for 145 a game,
Okay.
11 touchdowns. USC ran for 145 a game,
Okay.
20 rushing touchdowns. NC State, folks kind of liked NC State last year,
A little bit.
145 a game, 21 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh, liked the way they ran the ball, 141 a game, just 16 touchdowns.
Mm.
Mississippi State, 137 a game, 17 touchdowns. Houston, more yards per game than Nebraska, 135-4.
Mm-hmm.
How many rushing touchdowns they had?
Mm.
9.
Oof. That's rough.
22 is
Is the most.
SC's the only team in similar low total that scored that many touchdowns.
So I think part of this is a perception situation, right? Because, and I don't have the numbers.
That's incredible.
I'm stunned by that a little bit, but I think part of it.
It's not even close.
I think part of it is, and I don't have the conversion numbers in front of me. It feels like we had more opportunities than we converted, right? So
Utah had 8 rushing touchdowns, 130 a game.
When we're watching this in real time, and Utah is somebody that you usually look at as, hey, like, we'll grind you to a pulp, rushing offense, good offensive lineman. Like that's a stunning number there. But that's kind of the issue with, and Severe brings this up all the time, like red zone conversion percentages.
Oh, yeah.
That is, I think, the issue here. It feels like we had way more opportunities to score touchdowns and didn't convert them, right? So 22 might be the best out of that group, but I'd be really curious what the red zone conversion, like red zone touchdown percentage was out of those groups as well. Because I think that's where we feel like we left it on the table.
So for red zone offense, it's not bad as you think. Their percentage was like at 757
for getting points.
Yeah.
Do you have what the touchdown percentage was?
Oh, it's low.
Because that's the one that I think kind of bugs people the most.
This is red. Let me go to red zone offense. This is red zone defense. Red zone offense. Oh boy. Wow. What page is Nebraska going to be on?
Oof,
It's certainly not the first one.
that's
I'm going to fast forward to the third page.
yeah.
117.
Oof.
117.
In red zone touchdowns.
9 red zone passing touchdowns. Um, 20 red zone touchdowns.
Okay. So half.
11 field goals.
Okay.
And 40 red zone scores out of 55 red zone attempts.
So the overall percentage is
74.
so 75 like. is what you said. So that's not terrible. Nationally, that wasn't terrible, right?
No, but their red zone offense is 117th in the country overall
for the touchdowns.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I think our issue with the rushing touchdown comes in. We feel like if we were better,
and that makes sense too, especially on the hills. Was it Justin who just asked that question? Somebody funny, somebody smart asked that about the red zone rushing. Those numbers are kind of staggering.
Yeah, 117th in the country in red zone touchdown percentage. That's, I think, where we get this perception that we didn't run the ball well enough.
And you know what? I think Lance is right. I said low 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's right. Stay north of 25.
Sure. I think where they happen matters too, though, right? If we get, let's say we're in this neighborhood again next year, right? Let's say it's 130 to 140 yards a game. Let's say it's 22 to 25 rushing touchdowns. But let's say that number goes up from 9 rushing touchdowns in 40 red zone attempts to 15 rushing touchdowns in 40 red zone attempts. I would venture to guess then the red zone passing touchdowns would also go up if you're able to consistently run it in the red zone. It makes passing in the red zone a little bit easier as well because you're talking about being so condensed down there, and running the ball helps you loosen things up a little bit. That, to me, like contextually, if you move 6 of those touchdowns over to the red zone, I think it changes our perception of what happened last year a lot.
You know how many? Do you know Indiana's red zone scoring percentage?
It's gonna piss me off, isn't it? It's like 90.
93%. And they led the country in red zone attempts with 69.
Yeah, I'll do it.
But I mean, that's.
But hey, listen to that though. Listen,
Penn State was 2.
That's over the course of their 14 games.
Yeah.
So they had one more game than Nebraska, right? They had 14 more red zone trips. You're talking about
16 more. Nebraska had 53.
Oh, I said 55. Yeah. But you're basically talking about one more red zone trip a game.
Yeah.
But that conversion percentage
is incredible.
Is wildly different.
Yeah. And of that 93%, only 9 of them were field goals. They were scoring touchdowns.
Yes. So Nebraska had more field goals in 16 fewer attempts than
Ohio State, 88%, 88.7.
So again, right at 90%.
That's
how many attempts did they have, or how many red zone trips they have?
They're top 10, 62.
Okay, so you're talking about only 9 more trips to the red zone than Nebraska.
Yeah, but 16 games.
Yeah, so over the course of 16 games, that's like half a game, like half of an attempt a game.
That's wild.
But
just score about 3 more points in the red zone every trip, 2.5.
So maybe chasing 3 wasn't such a dumb thing after all.
No, I'm dead serious.
No, that's what I'm saying.
That's a big difference.
That's what I mean, though, right?
That's a huge difference.
3 more points per red zone attempt. We're talking about
just safely say 2.5 per trip.
We're talking about what Shafe was talking about, how this team probably underachieved. This is probably an 8 or 9 win team. So when Coach Rule says, "Hey, this is a good roster," he was telling us the truth.
Don't you like this year's roster better than last year?
I do. Because I'll go by position group, right? Which is real quick here. We'll go by position group. Do I like quarterback more than I did last year? I'll take a sophomore over a true freshman every day of the week.
Yeah.
Okay. Running back, I'm probably close to a wash personally.
That's fair because you're operating on assumption.
Yeah. Wide receivers, upgrade.
Okay.
I think the tight end room's probably a wash. I like the guys in there, but I liked it last year too. So quarterback and receivers I have as an upgrade. I think the offensive line's better than they were last
You
year.
have the majority of the same guys in the tight end room outside of Bork.
Bork and Fedoni, but you're moving Harburg over there full time. I think Mac Markway could be good, but I think it's about a
Who
wash.
knows what you're going to do with Carter?
Yeah.
So
I'm calling it a wash.
okay, that's fair.
So I'm calling quarterback, receiver, and I like the offensive line better than I did last year.
Okay.
I like the pieces. So that's 3 spots I think are better. I personally, now the defensive line I'm going to call a wash. I know that's probably blasphemy to most people because of how good Ty was and how good Nash was, even though he was banged up. I'm really high on the upside of this group. I'm not going to say they're better. I do think it's a wash.
I don't think you can wash it.
You think it's a
I
clear
think
downgrade?
until you see it.
Okay, fair.
Even though I think they're deeper this year, they're not as productive at the top end.
They're not as productive at the top end. I do think the potential is higher. I think we're talking about a higher potential group.
I got some options.
So we'll call 1 downgrade group. I got 3 upgrades, 1 downgrade. Okay?
What about the linebacker?
Linebackers? I think are better.
I do too.
That's 4.
Even though Bullock was incredible.
He was incredible, but I think overall they're upgraded at linebacker. Last defensive backs.
Better.
That's 5. 5 groups that we think are better, 1 that we think is a downgrade, but lower floor, higher ceiling in that 1 downgraded group, right? Is that fair?
Yeah.
So, yeah, overall, better roster. We think the specialists are going to be better than they were last year?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, pretty easy to look at it and say, hey, better roster. And then you go into each of those groups and you go, okay, not only do I like that group a little bit better, defensive line, more depth. Defensive backs, more depth. Linebackers, more depth. Offensive line, I think you've got more depth. Wide receivers, more depth.
Let me ask you something. If you could change one thing about last year, would you have made I get the easy answer. Think about what I'm asking.
Mm-hmm.
With trips in the red zone, given how Nebraska's season played out, and did Nebraska need more field goals or more touchdowns?
So the field goals are more frustrating. Like the misses are more frustrating, I think, because you're just watching. Like when you fail to score a touchdown in the red zone, it's usually a series of plays, right? Whereas you miss a field goal and you're like, hey, we've got points right here on the board, and you miss it. Going off the statistics that we just read off and seeing what Indiana did, I think I'd probably take the touchdowns. But that being said, I think field goals.
It wasn't a touchdown's worth of margin in the red zone, though. Right. That's the thing.
So, like, when I sit here and I go, okay, I want to take you want to score touchdowns in the red zone. I want to take touchdowns in the red zone.
Because that's the easy answer, right?
The statistics tell me.
Sometimes it's just doing. My point is, sometimes it's just being efficient.
So, how many field goals did Nebraska miss last year?
Well, they only had nine. Oh boy, I should be able to just pull that up, shouldn't I?
Because I don't know off the top of my head. I've got let me see if I can find the kickers here, because that I think is because the missed opportunities is like the missed opportunities is I think is where
I'm just going back to the chasing 3 thing again.
So we've got field goals made versus field goal attempted. So they were 13 for 19 on the season. But I think the real rub here is the ones they didn't even try.
Right? Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a great point. That they just felt like they didn't even give themselves a chance. Felt like they had to go for.
Like they didn't even feel like they had a chance to make it, so they didn't even put them out there, right? So that's where it gets really tricky for me. Is I can look at the numbers and go, hey, 13 out of 19, yeah, you'd like to make a couple more. As college kickers, you probably say, hey, if I go 16 out of 19, I'm pretty happy, right? So we're only talking 3 field goals,
especially inside of 40 yards,
right? But if we're talking about, hey, they probably had opportunities to kick 10, 12 more field goals than that over the course of the season, and they didn't feel like they could because of the situation they're kicking, that's when you get in the conversation of, if I felt like I could kick 80% from inside 40, then we're having a different conversation.
It's seldom this easy, but man, you make the field goal against Iowa, and it's like
you feel a lot different. You make a field goal against Iowa, you feel a lot different.
Couple years in a row, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you'd rather
like, oh, just give me the touchdowns.
But sometimes it's not getting better. Sometimes isn't.
It doesn't even have to be that.
It doesn't even have to be monumental.
Just feel like you can attempt the field goals.
Yeah.
Right? Like feel like the snap's going to get to where it needs to go every time.
They may be closer than I think at first blush.
And we think the roster is a little bit better.
All right, I got some homework to do.